Hello and welcome to another episode of the Northwestern Roundtable podcast. I'm your host, as always, Gavin Dorsey, coming off a fourth consecutive Wildcat win. Northwestern is 5-2, heading into the Week 8 game at Nebraska. The Wildcats need just one more win to clinch bowl eligibility. Coming off of a 19-0 shutout against Purdue, first shutout since 2017. Vibes are pretty high for the Wildcats, but a very daunting, a daunting road remains for Northwestern. I'm pleased to be joined now by Northwestern Roundtable writer Ryan Cole. Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Gavin. Thanks for having me on. For those who don't know me, I'm the other guy you might be reading on the site who's not Gavin. But yeah, no, I'm excited to be here and excited to talk about this Wildcat team that kind of just rose out of nowhere these past 2 weeks and brought home a couple really big wins. Now they're on the precipice of a bowl appearance. It's kind of nuts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the main questions was coming off that massive upset win against Penn State. Is this team going to come out flat against Purdue, a team that went 1-11 last year and, projected to be pretty bad again this year, albeit improved from that with new coach and lots of new additions. Northwestern doesn't start out flat, ends up scoring on its first three drives, builds a 13-0 lead, and then it kind of flatlines from there. The Wildcats end up scoring coming out of the half, making it 19-0, and from there things just kind of generally settle down and relax. Northwestern doesn't score over the end of the game. The defense, holds strong, but overall some in general mixed feelings around that game. Obviously, great for Northwestern to get a shutout, but maybe not so great with the way that the team closed out the end. So for you, Ryan, I understand that you were at the game in the student section, I believe. Were you feeling better or worse about this Northwestern football team and, kind of what they're going to be able to do this season after that Purdue win?
You know, um, Obviously the offense kind of struggled later in the game after they got out to that fast start. And, I can understand being a little bit concerned about that, but I think at the end of the day, we kind of know this is an imperfect team. They're playing really well right now, but there's some holes, receivers still that, haven't gone away. And Stone's improved, but he's still, he's not I wouldn't put him quite with the likes of Ben Bryant just yet, at least in my time here at the school. But yeah, I think overall I feel better about the team, right? I mean, David Braun likes to talk a lot about goals, and he said that kind of they take it a week at a time, and all the coach speak that you want to hear from your coach about when he's asked about bowl appearances. But ultimately, I think for an objective outside observer, the goal is to make a bowl game, and Northwestern didn't come out flat like they could have after the huge win over Purdue, over Penn State. And I thought they got a game that they absolutely had to have in order to make a bowl. The schedule doesn't really get easier from here, and Purdue was one you really had to win. And they got it done. The defense looked great. So yeah, of course there's some concerns with the offense, but I think we knew that. And overall, it's hard not to feel better about a team that ran the ball as well as it did, and a team that played as good of defense as we saw, and that got a huge victory to get within one win of bowl eligibility.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think you look for in any season, regardless of whether you're able to take down those top teams in the Big Ten, is can you win the games that you're supposed to win? Throughout Northwestern's history, that has not necessarily been the case. I mean, even in some of the best seasons in program history, there's a loss to Akron, or I was literally just going back to, I believe, the 2016 season when Northwestern was last in the Pinstripe Bowl, or they played in the Pinstripe Bowl, and there was a loss to Illinois State on there. I mean, what David Braun has been able to do, over his 2.5 seasons, you could obviously look at last year and you can look at the first year and say, oh, well, Northwestern just took care of business against the lower teams. But that hasn't always been the case in Northwestern's history. And so I think, I'm not going to say Purdue was a trap game by any means, but just kind of to go out there and take care of business, I think, against Purdue, against UCLA, who now UCLA seems to have turned the corner a little bit. But when Northwestern played them, one of the worst teams in the country at that point in time, as well as Western Illinois, you go back over the last few years, it's been a common theme under this program and under David Braun. And so I think kind of moving forward, this is about as good of a start as you could have asked for the Wildcats. You've taken care of the games that you were supposed to take care of. You had one really bad day against Tulane, lost to a team that you were supposed to lose to against Oregon, and then were able to pull off an incredible upset against Penn State. And now you have this Wildcat team that's, that's really in the mix for a lot of things that it can do. 3-1 in the Big Ten, just one game behind the leaders in Indiana and Ohio State, and Northwestern doesn't play either of those teams, so obviously less of a chance to kind of get into there, especially if those two teams win out. But still pretty remarkable what the team is doing, overall. Ryan, I want to ask you, in this 5-2 start, this was a little better than I predicted. I kind of figured 4-3 through this part of the season, and through 7 games so far. What has stood out to you the most about this Northwestern team? Maybe something about its identity, something that the Wildcats have done well, or just anything that you found interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a couple position groups I want to hit on in just a second, but I do want to answer this question by following up on something you just said, which is I think something that has stood out to me for sure is their ability to beat the teams that they should beat. And I think, as important as that is just for this year, it says a lot about David Braun and the future of this program. I mean, he talks, he talks like he has really big goals and dreams for this program, and that's great. He wants to compete for Big Ten championships and he wants to do all of that. But in order to kind of build up that prestige that you need in order to be a program that competes for those things, you have to consistently be, competitive in the Big Ten, and you have to be making bowl games. And especially in this revamped conference where you have all of these good teams that are really hard to beat, you have to win those games that you're supposed to win. And like if you lose one or two, it could sink your entire season. And it just seems like Braun really has them prepared for those games. And that's something, I'll be honest, I don't think I was David Braun's biggest defender going into this season after last year, but I think that is an incredibly valid thing to say about him, is that he's really, really done a good job of doing that. And I think that really matters moving forward. And it's definitely stuck out to me watching this year's team. But kind of specifically about the roster itself this year, I think I've been really impressed with the offensive line. Outside of the first play of the season when Tiernan got burned and there was the strip sack. Ever since then, it looks like it's gotten much better. I feel like they've protected Stone pretty well, and Ezomo Oradokai, is that how you say it?
Erratikai.
Erratikai, yeah, he's been fantastic as a freshman. There's been a lot to like on the offensive line, and I think we've given a lot of credit to, Komolafe and Hyman for keeping the running game going after the Porter injury, but maybe there should be more credit going to the big guys up front for what they've done, since Porter went down. And I think that that's really been Northwestern's offensive identity, especially since they've turned things around, is that they've relied less heavily on Preston Stone and they've gotten that running game going. And, I think that's really, really, really mattered. And then lastly, I think Preston Stone has stood out throughout the season for better or for worse at different times. Obviously at the start, things did not go well. He threw 6 picks in the first 3 games. And, I came on this podcast and lamented that pretty harshly at the time, but, now he seems to have turned it around quite a bit. Looks like he has much better command of the offense. He's not making as many risky throws. And I still have some questions about his deep ball accuracy, but other than that, I've been much more impressed with Stone, and he just looks like the kind of veteran leader that a team like this needs. So yeah, offensive line, and then definitely Stone's improvement, I think has stuck out to me recently.
Certainly. I mean, when you look at the offensive line, it's really interesting because last year they had 7 players in camp, and you really saw that manifest throughout the entire season, where there wasn't a lot of chemistry among the group. The various Northwestern quarterbacks, whether it was uh, whether it was Lausch or Wright, or eventually even, Helinski would come in for a couple throws. Bo came in for a couple throws. Really just didn't have a ton of time, and there was no sort of cohesion. And what we're seeing now is this is one of the best offensive line units in the country. I mean, Caleb Tiernan is the stalwart at left tackle. Mo Ratikai is phenomenal as only a redshirt freshman. Carcelo and Bjornson as well, in their grad student roles, just being incredibly stalwarts, like really, really strong on the interior. And on the right hand side, switching out between McGuire and Martez Lewis, it's just really seemed to all click. And the thing that's kind of stood out to me is how Northwestern has completely established its identity around the stereotype for Northwestern,
Mhm.
right? We've heard over and over and over again for years and years that Northwestern plays complementary football. They're not going to be a high scoring offense. They're going to play physical Big Ten West type of football, strong defense, good run game, own the time of possession, those kinds of things. And, for a while, it was just kind of like a cliche, at least for a while in like the Braun era, where it seemed like he was kind of trying to repeat a lot of the things that Northwestern was known for, but they didn't quite have the talent to back it up, or they didn't quite have the depth to do those kinds of things. And now we're really seeing a lot of it come to fruition. I mean, for starters, Northwestern's defense has been incredible. They're 22nd in the country in total defense, 11th in the country in scoring defense. That's, those are the recipes to winning. And then on the other side of that, Northwestern has been able to dominate time of possession, A, because of how strong the defense has been in getting stops and forcing the opponents off the field, but B, also because of how well the offense has run the ball, and how well, after that first week, the offensive line has kept Preston Stone upright and, given him the ability to not feel as pressured and not throw the ball away to the other team's arms several times. Northwestern, fifth in the nation in time of possession, just absolutely owning every single game that they have. And you could see it against Penn State too. That offense could not get in rhythm whatsoever. It's an incredibly talented offense, and they couldn't do it because Northwestern just held on to the ball so much. The other thing is just that I've noticed is just how well coached this team is, which I'll admit I've always kind of supported Braun being an NDSU fan, and rooting for him to come over to the Wildcats. But even over the last kind of year and stuff, I'm not sure that I would have said, "Oh yeah, you know this is a really well coached and organized team." This year, with his philosophies in A, being more aggressive, but being also very physically and mechanically, technologically sound. I mean, the Wildcats are third in the nation in penalty yards per game. They're one of the fewest flag teams. The secondary, very rarely grabs. The offensive line has done a very good job at pushing the line of scrimmage and advancing it without holding. I think just overall, top to bottom, what you can see here is a Northwestern team that is just so in cohesion with each other. The offense, the defense, everything kind of complements each other. And because of that, you're seeing those results on the scoreboard, starting at the 5-2 so far.
Yeah, and I think, you talk about kind of the winning the time of possession battle and how well they're doing that. And I think, you know, part of it is like it seemed like this team had this kind of chemistry and cohesion going into the year. That was part of the reason for atmosphere or for optimism. It seemed like, that's how Braun was describing the atmosphere in the locker room, and he kind of, you know, he got a lot of us reporters to really buy into it, I think, because he was so convincing, about that fact. And I think it kind of just all got thrown off early there when Stone threw all those picks, and it was like, you know, they didn't control time of possession because they were throwing picks. And so, they didn't hold on to the ball and make it hard for other teams to get in rhythm. Um, and then I think it all changed. He settled in, they stopped turning the ball over, and now we're seeing, you know, more of a true Northwestern identity, as you say. And I also, I want to speak on Braun a little bit. Like, my main criticism last year was that he didn't go for it on fourth down ever, and he kicked too many field goals. And I'm will self-identify as a bit of a an analytics guy, and I believe in them, their numbers. I think they tell the story. And Braun didn't listen to them a lot, and it was frustrating. And Especially I can remember like back in the Washington game where there was a field goal, they were down a bunch and it didn't make any sense. And they were pretty close in. But, you know, that's last year. And I've been really impressed with Braun's the adjustments he's made to kind of his philosophy this year. And he's been very forthright about it in his pressers about how he knows, he's a guy who comes from a defensive background and he wants to give his defense that chance to make the stops, but like I do think he's been more aggressive and he's trying to really take it to teams a little more, and I've appreciated that a lot. And I think no one ever questioned his ability to motivate a locker room. That was always from the time he stepped foot on campus. It was clear he could do that. I mean, he came into an impossible situation and led his squad to a bowl team in year one, and so that was never a concern of mine. But I think he's learning on the fly, how to be a better head coach on the field, and I think he seems really committed to that, and that excites me as someone who covers this team. So I've been very impressed with Braun, and I think he definitely deserves some flowers for how this has gone over the last few games.
Absolutely. I mean, I do think some of the fourth down decision making can get a little bit too aggressive at times, but I mean, the one that sticks out to me is that fake punt right before halftime, and you're sitting there, and Purdue has all three timeouts, and they haven't been able to get the ball past the 30-yard line. You're like, what are you doing?
And
But like, thinking about it, you're like, okay, I guess it was good execution too, and they saw an opportunity for it, they trusted the guys, and just overall it was a really good play by the Purdue player. But
yeah,
overall I also would rather have that than I'm gonna punt on 4th and 2 or 4th and 3.
right. I think he's got to, he'll slowly learn, like, and I don't want to talk like I'm some sort of expert. I'm not a football head coach, but, I've watched some football head coaches, and I think slowly he'll learn, like, when to take those shots and when not to. And he's feeling it out right now. And I'm just happy that he's taking that process seriously and he's not just doing what he did last year. And so, I didn't love the fake punt, but it is what it is. They won 19-0. No harm, no foul.
Right. I mean, one of the things that I do like enjoy, appreciate as well is that, I mean, because of, you know, the fact that Preston Stone almost always is throwing, in the 8 to 15, 8 to 20 yard range. When it gets into kind of that medium, fourth and 6, 4th and 7, and you're around the 35, 40 yard line, and you're like, oh, I don't know if this is going to be too far for Jack Olson. Or do we want to try putting in Luke Akers at this point in time? I have been appreciative that Braun has taken that opportunity to go for it. When
Hmm.
normally, you know, as a defensive coach, you're probably not thinking, fourth and 6 is room to go for it. But I mean, I don't even want to say analytics because I know that like I can't explain it in another way than just using the buzzword here. But
Hmm.
it's giving his team a better opportunity to win, and now he has the players and the personnel that he trusts them to convert those kinds of plays.
Hmm.
Especially also, I do love that they've practiced the 2-point conversion on the second touchdown. I want to say they've converted that 2 out of 3 times this year. I might be wrong, where they've had
That sounds
Lawson
right.
Albright sneak it in
Yeah.
under center.
I think that sounds right.
Something
Yeah,
like
that's
that.
been cool.
I mean, and he literally said, Coach Braun literally said, "Oh yeah, those kinds of decisions are not ones that I would have made a year ago." And he's completely flipped
Mhm.
everything since then. He's brought in a lot of different consultants and advisors, assistants, things like that, and really focused on the strategy part of it, which is something that's really impressed me.
Yeah, and there are football coaches out there who would have received the criticism that they're not aggressive enough and really dug in and like gotten annoyed at the media for asking about it. And Braun has done the exact opposite thing. I think he's actually, kind of listened to it and kind of he did some self-reflection clearly in the offseason after the upsetting year. And I think I think he's made a lot of strides, and I'm appreciative of the fact that Braun is doesn't seem to be a stubborn man. I think he really seems to love this job and he wants to be better at it, and it shows.
Yeah. Switching gears and going back a little bit to the Purdue game, I think
Mm,
one of the things that kind of left a bit of a sour taste in Northwestern fans' mouth is just kind of the way that game ended. In the fourth quarter, Northwestern went out to a 19-0 lead over the first half and then the first drive of the third quarter. It did not end great overall. Fourth quarter drives, Northwestern had 5 of them that were not the kneel down at the end of the half. They went punt, a 3-and-out, punt or fumble, which was almost a 3-and-out. That was the fumble by Deshaun Reeder after he had that big run. Punt, another 3-and-out, interception after 3 plays, and then a missed field goal after 5 plays. This isn't the only time that Northwestern has, struggled to close out a game. And even if this is the way, uh, that, Northwestern's defense was able to hold on and win that 19-0, you're probably not going to be able to have those kinds of mistakes in the future against upcoming opponents like Nebraska, like Michigan, like USC, like Minnesota, like Illinois. Um, with that and how Northwestern closed that game, I think a lot of the conversation has been maybe conservative play calling, which definitely was more of a conversation at UCLA. But I wanted to ask you, does the way that that game ended worry you? Are you worried? Were you thinking it was a play calling reason that Northwestern simply couldn't execute, or what did you take away from Northwestern's fourth quarter?
Well, Gavin, I think if I believed that this team was perfect and that it was going to run the table for the rest of this season, then yeah, I'd be a little more concerned about it. But I don't. I think they have an imperfect offense. It's not going to work on every series. You have to expect some of that. And I don't really chalk it up to conservative play calling either. I think it was just failed execution on multiple drives in a row in the at the end of the game. And, I also think that, if anything concerns me, it's what I said earlier. It's the turnovers. Don't love a fumble. Don't love a pick. Like this Northwestern offense goes when it doesn't turn the ball over. And, if those two possessions turn out differently, then we're talking about what, three and outs and 2 possessions that, could have something different could have happened, but they turn the ball over. And I think that makes it look much worse. So the key for this Northwestern team is to play great defense, which it's shown it's capable of doing, and to hold on to the ball, to run the football well, and to keep possession out of the other team's hand. And when you throw picks, when you fumble the football, you're not doing that. But I don't think that the identity of this team is at all, you know, dependent on playing perfect offense all the time and scoring on all your drives, because that's just not the offense that Northwestern has constructed for this season. It just isn't. So, I'm not concerned, and don't really believe that it has much to do with the play calling, at least not yet.
Yeah. No, I did actually think that, Northwestern, um, had a better approach this time in the fourth quarter compared to the UCLA game. I mean, in this fourth quarter, right? You remember you're down Caleb Komolafe, who Braun
Mhm.
expects to return this week against Nebraska. Preston Stone was banged up from Penn State and then got hit over. He slid a couple times and got hit against Nebraska. You had a couple opportunities where you drop a pass on second and medium, trying to, hey, we got to move the chains. We got to get some momentum. We've just had 2 consecutive 3-and-outs, and you end up with an inaccurate pass from Stone, or
Mhm.
a drop or something like that, or a penalty brings it back, which there weren't a lot of them, but it was always kind of at an inopportune time. And so overall, I agree with you. I think that it's not. I don't think it's a massive cause for concern because we saw the changes from UCLA to Purdue
Mhm.
and playing with the lead, and how that changed. I overall just kind of thought it was more of an execution thing, um, but definitely something that assuming Komolafe is back, assuming Hyman's at full strength, assuming Stone is a little bit less banged up and
Mhm.
whatnot at that moving forward. I don't think it's a massive issue. This Saturday, Northwestern is heading down to Memorial Stadium at Nebraska. Cornhuskers 5-2, just got completely stifled by Minnesota, 24-6. Um, it's a Nebraska team that is very talented. Was ranked for They were ranked last week, had been ranked for a little bit of the season. A really talented quarterback. Just kind of a quick preview moving forward. I know you usually do the three keys for Northwestern to win their upcoming game. I know that's probably coming up for you. Um, what would you say the Wildcats have to do, or what should they be looking out for against Nebraska?
Well, first, I mean, I think they need Komolafe. So if he's healthy, as it seems he is, I think that's a big deal. Because everything we've talked about for this entire episode is kind of predicated on having a good running game, and Hyman can do it, but they need Komolafe. And then, um, another thing I do. Speaking of Hyman, another thing I do want them to do is get him the ball more. He had 87 yards against Purdue. I think some of that was probably because or definitely because Komolafe went out. But he's always just looked like such a dynamic athlete out there, and Braun has said they want to put the ball in his hands more, and I think they should do that. Um, the other thing I think is they need to control Nebraska's passing attack. The Cats have had a pretty good secondary all year, and needs to continue because Nebraska's second in the Big Ten in passing yards per game behind USC. And so I think there's going to be some pressure on Northwestern secondary in this game to, control that attack. But if they can do that, I think they should be okay. But I also think there's something in the preparation for this game that the coaches need to hit on, which is, and I'm not sure what the answer is because in watching college sports, for most of my life, you see this phenomenon where a team loses and a game that they maybe should win, and they're pissed off about it, and they come home and they just rip the doors off the next poor group that comes in there because they're so motivated from the awful loss. And I think I read something about a players only or a players meeting or some sort of meeting that Nebraska had. They're fired up, and I think you got to be ready for that. As we've discussed, Braun has done a good job of making sure that the preparation is consistent and players get up for every game, but I think that's going to be a big deal on the road. So my main concern for this game is just the fact that it's on the road and they're dealing with that kind of phenomenon. And so I think they have to handle that the right way. And if they do so, they, with a healthy Komolafe, they have the pieces to win this game. I mean, Nebraska did not look good against Minnesota. I watched that whole game. It was parents' weekend here, and one of my roommates, his dad is a huge Gopher fan, and he was going nuts. And I've watched some Gopher games over the years, and this was one of the most inspiring wins I've seen from them recently. And Nebraska really just did not look like the number 25 team in the country in that game. But concerned about that phenomenon. So we'll see what happens. I'll take Northwestern 21, Nebraska 17 for now, but I think it could go either way.
Interesting. Yeah. The team gets embarrassed and then immediately, crushes the next team was the exact reason that I picked a blowout for Penn State to beat Northwestern.
Hmm.
And lo and behold, I mean, sometimes you have that response, that bouncing back, and sometimes, when it rains, it pours and everything goes
Hmm.
down. I do think that Nebraska is a team that I expect to rebound in some way, shape, or form. Um, Penn State is currently the only game that I have gotten wrong on the schedule. And I know before the year I predicted 5-7 for Northwestern and that fifth win coming against Nebraska. I will admit that I think Nebraska has been, better than I have expected this season, even with that loss last game to
Hmm.
Minnesota. Um, I'm now shifting my prediction where I think Northwestern probably gets that sixth win against Minnesota. I do still think that Nebraska is incredibly talented, and even though it's an 11 a.m. game, that's still a daunting road environment for the Cats. You know, Regardless of whether that team is good or bad, it's always a tough place to play. And you really can't deny what that team is doing in the passing game.
Hmm.
Dylan Raiola is so talented, and I mean those wideouts as well are just incredible. I'm gonna go with 24-20 Nebraska. I would not be surprised if Northwestern wins this game. I think it'll be one score regardless of who it is, and I think if Northwestern wins this game and gets to 6-2, people maybe start talking about ranked Northwestern.
Hmm.
Probably not, because I know the ensuing week against USC, I'm sure, the Trojans would probably be heavily favored in that one. Um, but I do think overall that, regardless of whether Northwestern narrowly wins or narrowly loses, I don't think the outcome of this game significantly shifts the trajectory that
Hmm.
the Wildcats are on this season.
I agree, but I do think it could be big to kind of get the monkey off your back of like, okay, we got the like we're in the bowl. We
Right.
made a bowl game, we're fine. Because then, I do think when you look ahead at the schedule, USC feels like a loss to me.
Mhm.
Don't like I mean, it's on the road,
Yeah.
don't like it. Um, Michigan at home at Wrigley,
Home is in Wrigley. Home
I
is in
don't
Wrigley,
know.
which means
Yeah,
it's
Wrigley,
gonna
which
be,
isn't
like,
really
probably
home.
80% Michigan
Yeah.
fans.
Yeah, so not loving that. Then it really comes down to the Minnesota game, I think. Like they're going to need to win that game. But if you beat Nebraska on the road, then I don't know. Maybe you could beat Michigan at Wrigley. Maybe you could beat Illinois. Weird things happen for the hat,
Yeah.
So that
The Yeah. The
there's
one
other
thing that I
there.
think about is that, you and I definitely think about this a lot more. Where is the sixth win going to come from? And the entire season, every time we try and ask some kind of question about the team's goals or, what this team's capable of or anything, no matter whether it's the players or the coaches, anybody we talk to is, yep, we're just focused on 1 week at a time. We're locked in on the next one. So I don't think that there is probably a monkey on their back, for example, per se. And I do think that they, after doubting them for a while because it was just kind of coach speak, I do believe them now that they are actually
Mhm,
just looking at 1 week at a time, and really not focused at all. I mean, especially after a year like that last year where they were 4-8, you kind of have to.
mhm.
And so I don't think there's any added pressure to win this Nebraska game, knowing how difficult the upcoming schedule is. But it would be a pretty big boost if they do.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
just a quick, prediction question for you. Where do you think that sixth win is going to come from for Northwestern? And do you think they're going to get that sixth win?
Well, I think it's coming in the Nebraska game since I just took Northwestern. But
Right, right,
however, I do think that, listen, when I was making that prediction, I think I made it clear I'm not 100% confident in that call. Like I think this one could really go either way. Um, but I feel confident in Northwestern's ability to stay in it. So I took them because I think, they can win this game. They've won a bunch of games recently, and who am I to say they can't win this one? I guess was my thought process on that. But if it doesn't happen this week, then I think the obvious answer is Minnesota.
right,
Um, just because I think the road games are going to be really hard. As I said, I'm not confident in USC, and Illinois is ranked number 23 right now, and that's they're good. Um, so it's probably the Minnesota game. I think the Michigan game at Wrigley is potentially winnable. It's not out of the question. But I think you're right. It's going to be so many Michigan fans there, and there'll probably be plenty of Minnesota fans there too at Wrigley. But the Michigan crowd, especially in Chicago, is just so massive that it seems like we're going to be at a serious home field disadvantage.
right. Exactly.
So yeah, so I think it's likely to be either this week or if not that Minnesota.
Probably. Very similar predictions for me as well. Ryan, appreciate you coming on the pod. Everybody can obviously find your stuff on Northwestern Roundtable. Thank you guys so much for listening in. I will try to be down in Nebraska this Saturday. We'll see if I'm able to find a ride on the way down, able to get there. But otherwise, you can always find all of our content at roundtable.io/sports/NCAA/Northwestern. You can listen to the podcast on Northwestern Roundtable on Spotify and Northwestern Roundtable on YouTube, as well as press conferences and short video clips. And stay tuned for more coverage throughout the game week. Once again, thanks so much for listening, and go Cats.